and welcome to MyCounselor.Online. I'm your host, Brittany East, and joining me today as our featured counselor is Jessica Park. Jessica is sharing her part 2 to her Surviving Your Spouse's Porn Addiction article series. But before we jump into part 2, Jessica, can you share a little bit about yourself for those viewers who may not know you yet?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jessica. I have been a part of MCO, My Counselor Online, for about a year now. I live in North Carolina and I am married, live here with my husband and my dog.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I'm excited to have you here with us sharing your heart. I know in your previous article series, like you shared, just how important it is for you to be with married couples. And love that so much. So the title of your article series is Surviving Your Spouse's Porn Addiction. Part 1 kind of focused on that initial shock, oh man, I found out I'm going to have this reaction. It's either going to be explosive anger. Typically we fall into one of two camps. Either I'm an explosive anger person or I'm forgive and move on person. We kind of broke down the nuances of those, the pros and cons, and just really kind of coming back to healing, and having safe people in our lives to get through that. Your second article is focusing more on the myths behind where porn addiction comes from, who's to blame for that porn addiction, whether it's the spouse who's doing it or the one the one who discovered it. So in this article, we're kind of diving into where do porn addictions come from, that history, and what you can do about it, knowing that information. What inspired you to write this part of the article?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I kind of touched on in the first part of this series or in the first video that we did, that it was really the Lord who inspired me to start this project. So he started me off on it, and I just really felt like there are a few things I didn't get to address in the first article without making it into a novel. And so just wanted to take a part to communicate those things.
Awesome. And so who is this article written for?
I would say this article is pretty geared towards those individuals whose spouses are struggling with an addiction to pornography or kind of any other type of sexual addiction.
All right. Yeah. And I appreciate your first article just kind of dealt with any type of, it was about pornography, but if you had a relational trauma, it kind of could be addressed to this. But this one you're saying is specifically for pornography addiction and where we're going from there.
Right. A little more focused.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So what is the common myth about porn addiction and who caused it?
Yes. Something that, I hear over and over again in sessions is, if only I were sexier, skinnier, more interested in sex, nicer, more interesting, smarter, then my spouse wouldn't be looking at porn.
Wow.
Yeah, really hearing that if I was different and fill in the blank way, then, I would be desirable and fulfilling, and this wouldn't be a problem.
And I feel like that makes sense because it's porn is sex. So it's if you're not, as a spouse, if you're not doing enough sex things, maybe that's why my spouse found viewing sex somewhere else like that. I mean, it seems logical. But I know you kind of talk about also kind of how we can view the different ways we can view porn addiction. So the first part is kind of oh, it's a spousal issue. The other issue you brought up is sometimes people just view it as a lust issue, just self-control. This one who has the addiction it's a self-control issue. What's the problem considering it as just a lust issue?
Yes. Yeah, I liked how you said that. Just kind of a self-control issue. When we're just considering this as a lust issue, we're really talking about kind of the fruit and not the root of the issue.
Okay.
Yeah, and kind of not acknowledging the full range of what has contributed to the problem.
Okay.
So then our treatment comes up short because we're really just kind of treating the symptom and not the root issue behind it.
Okay. So what factors actually contribute to a sexual addiction then, if like the lust or the viewing is the fruit versus the root?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what research is kind of telling us is that um, kind of past issues or what it was like growing up in your family of origin with your parents or other maybe significant experiences of pain or fear or trauma in kind of formative years can really contribute to the development of these behaviors and addictions. And then it's also just important to, shoot, I just lost my word.
Well, I know in your article you talked about like you said you consider the pain, messaging, trauma of early life, and then compounded by like if there's difficulties in today's life, like they kind of just when they can meet, it can be like a perfect storm type of situation.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. So there are like past issues that really contribute to the development, make people susceptible to this
Okay.
kind of addiction. But then kind of it's so important to take stock of present day factors, like
Okay.
what is holding this thing in place? A big one that we're finding is kind of isolation, aloneness.
Wow. Okay.
And so kind of getting to really examine fully where are all the things that contribute to this development, and then kind of the maintenance, holding this in place, and then kind of working on it from there can be helpful.
Yeah. And then specifically for like pornography use, like are there specific predictors? I mean, I know we talked about like childhood stuff, present day stuff, but are there like very specific predictors that can kind of like, if these things are happening, it's very likely you maybe need to be like more aware, maybe put up more safeguards?
Yeah. So Jay Stringer, his book Unwanted is definitely a resource I would recommend to anyone kind of walking along this journey, no matter what side of the issue you're on.
Okay.
He's a licensed mental health therapist and an ordained minister, and he is committed to researching this issue and helping people really walk into freedom. He did a survey with men and women, about 3,600 people, and he identified 3 predictors of porn use.
Okay.
And those were lack of purpose, sexual abuse, and shame.
Can you, sorry, if you're gonna say something else, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, so like some really deep issues, right? Like that require healing in community and relationship. And if you're a believer with the Lord, definitely not kind of the quick fix, like put an internet filter on. That's just not going to cut it for kind of these really deep seated issues. And so
yeah, that makes sense. Do you mind going like maybe explain like for lack of purpose, does that just mean like they don't know what they want to do with their lives? Like what does that mean when you say it's like lack of purpose is kind of a predictor?
Yeah, I would say kind of maybe really tied to identity, don't know who I am.
Oh, okay.
Kind of don't know where I'm going. And a lot of that can kind of stem back to what we were talking about, those formative experiences growing up with mom and dad in the home. And so again, kind of maybe revisiting the story of where you've come from can fill in exactly what that looks like in your life.
And then as far as like, I mean, obviously I feel like sexual abuse is pretty self-explanatory, but then with like shame, is it shame about that you're doing the pornography, or is it just like you just tend to react in shame with your decision making? Like, can you explain that a little bit more maybe?
Yeah, I would say both.
Okay.
I think shame can really be kind of a pre-existing factor.
Okay.
And then the behavior of engaging in pornography really confirms that sense of shame that maybe we already had before we got to the pornography. And it just reinforces this as a really vicious cycle, kind of a loop that keeps people really caught in it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I know we talked a little bit in the beginning, like the common myths, and we just talked a little bit more about like why it's deeper than just like a lust issue. Yeah. I feel like now we're maybe transitioning to like what it's deeper than just I need to be a sexier spouse issue. Why won't like just fixing like yourself to be the best spouse, like fix your spouse's addiction?
Yeah. Well, first I want to start by saying, when we talk about fixing, we are probably referring to some things that could be good. So for instance, maybe you want to go develop a new interest or hobby, or, you want to start going to therapy and really working on yourself. Or you want to get outside and be more active. Great. Like those things are great, right? And do them for you. But let's not be confused about the cause of your spouse's addiction. The cause isn't you. And so the solution isn't going to be you just changing yourself, trying to be better.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think it is hard sometimes to accept that pornography use is like a very personal issue versus that it is like a marriage issue. You know what I mean? Like it's like it, and I feel like, at least from what I've read, like a lot of times pornography, it's like it happened even like before marriage. Like it wasn't like a marriage caused this, or it just kind of popped up. Like what you talked about, like a lot of factors went into that. Do you feel like you see that often in your practice, that like it was happening before, maybe stopped and then came up again, or
Yeah, the tragedy of it is, I hear stories all the time about I was first introduced to porn at age 8, 9, 10. Didn't even know what it was. Found the magazines under my dad's dresser or in my uncle's garage, or my friend brought them over. And in the time where the brain's developing its wiring, this is kind of, what's happening. So definitely an issue that kind of, I would say, most often predates marriage. So
that's really hard. So I know in your article you talked about one of the ways, again, like kind of like and I love how you said it. It's like we can still like work on ourselves, because like it's still a traumatic issue, like finding out that your spouse has an sexual addiction. And so there are things you can do to like help you process that, whether that is, and again, like you said, like doing it for yourself. One thing you mentioned, which I hadn't really heard of before, and I don't know if you could like expound on a little bit, is you said that there was a resource that said you should make a list of everything your spouse is doing that makes you angry. Like, why is that helpful? And how does that not just take you down like a tornado of like anger then?
Right. That's where you might need to utilize your anger container before you bring the list to your spouse. But in all seriousness, the goal isn't to write the list and then hand it to your spouse and say, here's all the things I like you to work on.
Yeah.
All of the list is really to help, you stay connected to the idea of, this is my responsibility. These are my emotions. This is my journey, right? I'm going to let my spouse have their journey. I'm going to let them do their healing. But this is how I can practice engaging mine, by paying attention to what's happening on the inside of me. And anger is one of those great emotions that cues us that there are needs, there's maybe pain, there's some boundaries that are needing to be set. Okay. So it can be a really helpful emotion to kind of listen to and say, what are my options here?
Okay.
How could I respond in an honest and kind way? Write out some possible responses, use I statements, and really give you a chance to practice sharing and showing up with your emotions, right? And expressing them honestly and kindly to your spouse.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. I mean, not that your article didn't make sense, but I like just like how you're saying how it's maybe more of a processing too. And I think even maybe it sounded like to me, at least, if I were to envision like myself doing it, just like a safe place to feel like one, it's okay to admit that like I'm angry about this. Like I love in your article, you said like, whether it's a small thing, like I'm angry, you keep leaving the toothpaste lid off, like please stop. Or like, I'm angry that like you betrayed me. Like just the gambit you can write down, because I feel like when we talked about a lot in our first videos, like the stuffing is like not ever going to like lead to healing. Like, ignoring those things that are making us angry is not going to like just make it go away.
Yeah.
But really it sounds like you just want people to like face their anger in a way that's like, oh, I'm angry, but like I can do something about that and I can react. Like, what can I do about that? In a way that leads to productive conversation versus just feeling stuck in the anger.
Yes, it's a way through. I love how you said that. Yeah.
So I know something else you said, like sometimes we may feel like I don't need to fix myself, like I'm okay, but I do need to fix my spouse. And so I'm going to do that by controlling and being on top of their recovery. But like, why doesn't that work either? Like, why is that also just not a great way to help your spouse like work through their own recovery?
Yes. Oh, it's so tempting, right? Because we could come up with a plan in like 45 minutes, execute it, everything should be good. Again, it feels like the solution to how everyone is hurting.
Mm,
Really, in the end, this kind of assuming responsibility for our spouse's recovery will shoot us in the foot, because
mm,
I think what we're wanting is an equal partner, somebody who takes
wow.
responsibility for their life, somebody
Yeah.
who makes good decisions, right? And the only way that they're going to get there is if they have kind of the permission, the allowance, the freedom, the space to choose to make those decisions or not. And so it really requires kind of a stepping back, focusing on myself, right? Letting my spouse kind of have the freedom to choose what they're going to do with their life. Gives them
Yeah.
ownership, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think in your article you also mentioned just like it kind of makes you like you don't want to go into like a parent role. Like that's not a healthy
Mm,
marriage where like one spouse is a parent and the other one's the child, like being told what to do, but
yeah.
really trying to like let them take ownership. And I mean, I think even for myself, like not even talking about something as serious as pornography addiction, but even like when if there's a part in my husband's life that I feel like, oh, like I really wish I'd get better, and he takes ownership of it, it feels like I don't know, for me, it's so amazing. I don't know how you feel that if they feel that way with like your husband, if it's like, oh wow, like that's awesome to watch. And it feels like almost like builds more trust that like they're willing to like take ownership when they do that.
Yes. Ooh, love that. So this is an opportunity for trust to be rebuilt. Yeah, so good.
So what final piece of advice would you give to couples watching this, maybe even realizing like, oh wow, like I didn't know that pornography was had such a deep root, like it's really not just this like surface issue. And like maybe they're discovering that or figuring out that maybe the responses they had aren't very helpful. Like what final piece of advice would you give to people after hearing all this?
Yeah. Man, I just want people to know that healing is real.
Mm,
I think particularly when we're talking about this issue, where we have had really kind of surface level treatments and ideas for how to fix it, it's really caught people up in a cycle of just failure and shame.
mm,
And so I just want people to know like there's healing available. It is real on both sides, right?
yeah.
And I, in the context of a marriage, when this happens, it is the hardest thing, right? It's just unbelievably painful. But it also provides an opportunity for some of the deepest healing
Mm,
individually and between, the two spouses. And so that's my hope for people, is that they would read this and feel like there's hope, and maybe even have, vision for, how we could get through, and that
yeah.
we might make it through.
That's really beautiful. And I just really appreciate that. Yeah, like I mean, sin is a part of life. Not that again, not to like sin, it's whatever. We're just like gonna make this appear smaller than what it is. But yeah, there's always like God provides so much hope for all sin. So just really appreciate the idea of like focusing on hope, and that there is like couples have made it through. It's not
Mhm.
impossible. I'm just curious. So if someone wanted to like get counseling for like their pornography addiction, is it usually like a couples thing? Like, do you both go, or is it just the spouse who has the addiction that like goes to counseling if they feel like counseling is the best way to like kind of stop this cycle of shame and fear and everything?
Good question. You know, I think kind of like we had talked about earlier, it's always going to first start with what the individual is willing to do and feels like is a choice they're wanting to make and they're ready to make.
Okay.
And then maybe it's a conversation, does it feel like we could kind of be productive and make progress together in a marital setting? Does it feel like individual would be more helpful? And
Sure.
sometimes you have to make those tough decisions about what it's time for right now. As much as we would all love to afford all the therapy every week for everyone,
Right, but really.
So that could also be a conversation that you have with the therapist, and
Okay.
kind of just drawing on their thoughts and ideas about that as well, and make a good collaborative decision. So
Thanks. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining me for part 2. I feel like it was really insightful. And again, like, I feel like your heart just comes through like so deeply just for like the hope you want to provide people. Like you said, like this whole series started after prayer, like God really putting on your heart for people to see that they don't have to be stuck here, or like marriages don't have to die here if they, don't want that. So thank you so much for joining me today again.
Thanks, Brittany.
And everyone who joined us today to watch and listen, thank you so much. We're so glad that we can share these resources with you. We really want to give you hope here at MCO, that there is nothing under the sun that can't be talked about, and that there's always ways to move forward. If you are curious about other articles that we've written or our counselors have written and that we've discussed, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. If you search Love My Counselor. On YouTube, you can search My Counselor Online Christian Counseling, and you'll find our archived videos there. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another episode of My Counselor Online.